So we are in modern traditionalism, which is one of my favorite categories here at QuiltCon. And this is the winner this year. It is The Pointy Beast by Susan Braverman. I think she has another quilt in this, at least one more, actually, in this show. And she said, this quilt updates the classic New York beauty block with large scale and striking high contrast colors. It says, look at me from across the room. The design continues my series exploring the interplay of an inset grid layout. Dense grid quilting anchors the design's structured form. A variety of thread colors were used to create nuanced value shifts throughout. You can see it's almost like the design extends into a very wide border. It's the same general design and shape, but how they play together on the edges is very, very interesting. So there's this kind of mulberry color, maybe raspberry, versus the blue of the center of the grid. And there's the vibrancy of these suns, or the New York beauty, all around the outside with a little bit more muted coloring in the center square. It really creates a very visual experience. And there's a lot of different thread colors in the quilting. You can see that perfect grid quilting that really enhances the design. So we're still in modern traditionalism, which we should be because this is just the second quilt. Yeah. This is the second place winner, Jennifer Canton, and the name of this quilt is Circle Play, and you can see it. I like the really esoteric, interesting quilt names, but I also like the ones that tell you exactly what it is. Jennifer says, creating primary and secondary shapes is central to the modern quilting aesthetic. In this contemporary interpretation of a traditional orange peel design, I explore why viewers see one shape versus another, a circle or a four-petal flower. What role do color, value, and shape play in how viewers' eyes track and interpret the subject matter? I think one of the reasons why I love modern traditionalism so much is it does not totally eschew all of the beautiful traditional designs and kind of the ladder that we've climbed to get here as quilters. So it honors some of those traditional shapes and blocks, but it takes it in a different direction, which gives it that fresh modern take. So I think that's why this is one of my favorite categories. So for example, an orange peel block, and it's clearly an orange peel block, but it does have a very different and subtle spin to it, which makes it really interesting. It looks like Jennifer used denim in this quilt. And so that's always fun when you see folks repurposing materials as if they are quilting cottons. And again, that's another step away, or maybe a step toward our original traditional roots. So just a really fun mix of textiles and substrates in this quilt. So this is 100 Days of Apple Cores by Cassandra Beaver. I like a lot of the work that she's done. She's had quilts in previous years. And she said, how does an up-and-coming color trend meld with a traditional shape? For my 2024 100-day quilt, I used the Pantone color of the year, Peach Fuzz. So now we have another Peach Fuzz in the show. And she said she featured apple core blocks, which she improvisationally pieced rectangles of fabric for the individual blocks before using AccuQuilt to cut the final apple core shape. The piecing within each block enhances the unexpected diagonal gradient that moves across the entire quilt. I would have thought that was planned. So how delightful that she really didn't intend for it to have this gradient, but the little bitty teeny tiny strips, the piecing, that has to be 1/8 of an inch or smaller, does kind of pull your eye in and through the quilt from that top left corner into the Peach Fuzz. And it's unusual to see such a curved edge as well. It's a very defined shape along the edge, unlike a lot of the quilts here that have a hard straight edge on them. This is Crystal Creek by Erin Kroeker. You may know her if you are on Instagram as the blanket statement. She had a quilt in last year's quilt show that was really beautiful. This one is inspired by a lifetime of exploring shorelines in search of unique rocks and gems. This quilt is a celebration of nature's treasures, featuring crystal-like blocks that reflect and refract light, surrounded by negative space resembling a flowing creek, creating playful wave-like movement. Drawing color inspiration from the vast Canadian wilderness, from dense forests and misty mornings, red dirt roads and rugged rocks, to northern lights and golden prairie sunsets, a tribute to beauty and diversity. So it's really big, bold, piecing, some beautiful colors. If you've seen Erin on the blanket statement, she does a lot of quilt reveals in front of trees in her area and in nature. So you can see her love of nature absolutely comes just shining through. This big stitch quilting, hand quilting. Gosh, this could have gone in several different categories. This could have gone in handwork for sure. Gives it that movement with the crystalline rocks that are anchored to each other. I really like this. And I love the plum binding set against that dark background is really pretty. So this is Trellis by Andrea Sang Jackson from Canada. And she said this began a few years ago with a 100-day project where I drew something quickly every day using a brush pen on 4x6 index cards. And she said, I was taken with the botanical motifs that emerged as contour line drawings. We're seeing a lot of line drawing inspiration this year. We've seen those in previous categories. So you can see the Irish chain, and that's that anchor to traditionalism. But then these line drawings of unique flowers and petals and botanical. So it's just a really interesting mix of the almost like doodle whimsy line drawings together with such a stolid, stable Irish chain in these high contrast blacks and whites is really interesting. She says she had a vision to create floral drawings with fusible bias tape, mimicking drawing on paper. In Trellis, the traditional Irish chain gives a sense of order and structure to the flowing lines. And it does. That's beautiful. And her quilting mimics what's going on in the piecing as well. So there's these floral designs in the quilting and then these angular diamonds that also provide structure and order in between each of the Irish chains where they connect. So still in modern traditionalism, this is Blossoming by Paula Steel from UK. We've seen at least one other quilt from Paula Steel. And she said, inspired by the many petal layers of a flower, I wanted to create a quilt where your eye is drawn to the center through the layers. The quilt is constructed as a traditional medallion. However, each round of blocks also influences the round next to it, giving it a sense of depth and overlapping. And of course, it's incredibly vibrant. And I mean, I'm a sucker for a rainbow. We know this. But it has this really interesting combination of triangles and half square triangles and squares, and then into curves and then back into angled pieces. So there's just a lot of celebration of shapes and color at the same time. And then the border is a red and fuchsia 9-patch all the way around the entire quilt that both anchors it and gives it interest at the edges with colorful quilting, matchstick quilting all across the entire quilt. So this is Aerosmith. The puns, they never end in quilting world, by Cordelia Nance. And the artist statement says, walk this way. So great. So great. I love it. All of these eras and color pairings that are both interesting. There's some high contrast, there's some low contrast. There are eras that are all the same color. There are eras that are the arrow part. The arrowhead is one color and the shaft is a different color. Really fun striped binding all around the whole edge. This one is just absolutely full of whimsy, so much so that you don't even, you forget how much skill is involved in making each of those eras. And it was machine quilted on a domestic machine. This was not long arm quilted. And it is not small. I don't know if you've picked up on that. So just managing this through a domestic machine is no small thing. But interestingly, it's mostly horizontal quilting until you get to this central column where there's the vertical quilting as well. So there's so much going on in this and in the best possible way. It's an interesting color story too. So this is Gameplay by Sophie Zaugg. I walked up and just immediately went, ooh, I like this. I love the color story in this quilt. All the plum and periwinkle and cornflower and gray, and then that punch of mustard yellow that gives it the contrast. So you've got light and dark contrast, and then you have tonal contrast. And the quilting is beautiful. She used that mustard yellow to quilt into the mustard area and through the aubergine, through the white. There's hand stitching here, there's hand quilting here, really fun piecing. She says, I use a log cabin style construction to surround and showcase hand applique circles. Oh, mercy, look at those beautiful applique circles. Wow. The design reminds me of game board and pieces in strategy board games, which inspired me. Gameplay as the title. So this is Mutant Marigolds by Karen Dooling, and it is exactly what it says it is. She says 9 blocks have been twisted and put in motion. They're whirling, twirling, and coming apart. It's not really a log cabin block, nor a pineapple block, but something else. It's a trippy bouquet of 9 French marigolds intended to bring smile, which it absolutely does, Karen. For those that love orange and yellow, this marigold color might just be a perfect blend of the two. And I think absolutely. There's just an interesting color story happening here. So lime green and tangerine and vermilion and navy. It's so many colors on that marigold background with marigold quilting. And then fun binding. So we've got orange binding down one corner and then the marigold binding on the other side. So... trippy is what she called it. I don't know that I would have called it trippy, but I feel like it works. So this is Obstructed View by Natalie Skinner, and she says, from Canada, and she says, I began this quilt by making a variety of 12-inch blocks composed of simple squares, rectangles, triangles, and drunkard's paths. Each block is unique, and as I placed them next to one another, a bustling cityscape began to appear. I see it. For a moment, I thought this might be another peach fuzz because it's got that peach in it. She's done some really interesting work with her quilting. Looks like a periwinkle blue. It's probably the same color as the binding. And so it's this radically different color. And up against each one of the colors, a lot of intricate and customized quilting in each section. This is Wild Geese, and then in parentheses, You Do Not Have to Be Good by Melissa de Leon Mason. And she says, you do not have to be good, Mary Oliver tells us in her poem, Wild Geese. This quilt celebrates the wildness of creativity breaking through a traditional flying geese motif. The graffiti print flows into negative white space, ever growing through fluorescent circular quilting, speaking to the expansiveness that the modern quilt community brings to the greater story of quilting. So you see the flying geese radiating out from the center. So it's in the four northeast, south, east, west. And then in between them is just such an interesting angular pieces, but because of the concentric circles of the fluorescent quilting, they don't feel straight. They feel curved. And so it really has that ripple effect and kind of warps the shapes to the edge because of the negative space and the choice of fabrics with the graffiti print. So this is Modern Dresden by Jennifer Canton, and you can see it immediately, like the radiating circle, but it's not a complete Dresden plate, and I just love that. First of all, I think I would call this cerulean blue background is to die for. It's gorgeous in center circle. But Jennifer says, about a year ago, I started a series of spiral fabric color conversations and became curious about how the intuitive addition of colors led to a subconscious train of thought in color. Apparent randomness isn't random because there are connections and associated that each person makes with color choice. In that spirit, this piece is a giant contemporary take on the traditional Dresden plate quilt design, improvised with colors evoking seasonal change and transition. So I'm feeling spring, summer, fall, winter, evoking seasonal change. That feels like spring to me. And then it kind of goes into maybe summer. And then as summer starts to become warmer tones, the browns and dark purple and olives of fall. And this straight line quilting, vertical straight line quilting in that same bright blue. Color theory and how colors play against each other and how they can feel warm, for example, even if it's bright fuchsia, or it can feel cool, even if it's army green. Let's just never really know how they're going to play with each other and how people are going to feel about them. I'm going to say the phrase, Dear Jane Quilt, and you're going to go, huh? And then I'm going to read the artist statement. So this is Dedication to Jane Stickle by Irina Timofeeva from Russian Federation. Over the many years of the Dear Jane quilt, its blocks have become unquestionably recognizable. You may not immediately see the familiar blocks here, but they are modern, different, new, and still the same Dear Jane blocks. So you can see where Irina was going. So there's a 9 patch that's been turned on its side and asymmetric. There's orange peel blocks here. There are Drunkard's Path blocks here. What she's done is turned them and kind of cut them in half or in part. And I'll be honest, I don't know everything that's in the Dear Jane quilt, but I think this is so beautiful and interesting. And this ombre effect that she has from the light radiating out. And then, oh, if I could have you all here with me to see this quilting. Through the center, there's light thread quilting. And as it radiates out, she has used the navy quilt thread to match the navy quilting or navy background. And done just some really interesting work with crosshatch quilting, making shapes of their own out to the side and the border in between this matchstick quilting. This could go in minimalism as well. So this is Fokus, Fokus, by Jenny Haynes. And she says, the Fokus quilt design came out of my continuous play with size and value. I am a fan of the folks that play with the size of their blocks. Stacked curves made from multiple Drunkard's Path template set are arranged in size order in each of the 8 wedges. This unexpected mashup of 2 of my designs, Hexibore, which I love her Hexibore quilt, and Tumbling Reels comes in many versions. Okay, you had me at symmetry. Yeah. You had me at multiple shapes, and you have me at rainbow also. Then there's the quilting. So in each of the curved blocks, she has curved quilting going the opposite direction of the curve of the block. So that alone gives so much interest and movement. Her curves get bigger as the block gets bigger. Then, if that's not enough, she connects each of the 8 segments with this diagonal quilting. So in between is grid quilting that is sized according to the block that it's near. And then it moves into 1-inch quilting, grid quilting, and then 1/2-inch quilting, and then 1/4-inch quilting on the grid in between the curved pieces, and then ending in the center with diamond quilting that radiates out from the center. It simultaneously pulls your eye into the center because of the ombre, and also out to the edges because as it gets lighter and there's more space. So it has that depth in the center and the breadth in the exterior corners. I love this so much. So this is Momentum by Lyndsey Eisenhardt. We're still in modern traditionalism. And she says, while juggling everything on our plates to keep pushing forward, a beautiful yet unexpected life unfolds. Momentum employs color to create illusions of stars and diamonds, emerging from spinning plates in a modern take on the traditional Dresden plate block. So where Jennifer Canton went rounder and more circular with jutting out edges, Lyndsey went a little more squared off edges and created diamonds and triangles and all of those great angled edges. Machine piece seams joined together at reverse applique centers, which are accentuated by straight line quilting using a domestic machine. And you can see that reverse applique in the center. So it has that feeling of depth and pulling, that there's something behind the piecing sitting on the top. It's also a beautiful celebration of the color wheel. So we're still in modern traditionalism. This is Masks 3/2020 to 6/2022 by Kristin La Flamme, or maybe it's La Flamme. This work is created from the handmade face masks I made and then wore every day at my retail job for over 2 years, from the beginning of the COVID lockdown until we felt our coworkers and customers were no longer at acute risk. The colorful mask fabrics are paired with stereotypical hospital scrubs and scrub-colored fabric in reference to the health crisis that the emergence of the pandemic created. I personally resonate with this quilt so much as a full-time pharmacist working through the pandemic. The classic half square triangles surrounding a square that says epidemic, pandemic, endemic. Those words are created by the quilting itself. And there's quilting that radiates out from them and then over to these applique circles all throughout the border and into the edges, which to me feels like, I don't know if this was the artist's intention, but it feels like germs floating. And if you've ever seen any hospital show anywhere, you know that this kind of gray-green, the sage green, is pretty typical hospital scrub color. So, and it's got that wonderful celebration of all of the colors around that central square. So we're still in modern traditionalism, and this is Herald and Mauve by Cordelia Nance, and her artist statement says, Harold loves mauve. So you can see she's taken her half square triangles and really just turned them in such a way, really wide grid quilting, but very intricate piecing. So little bitty half square triangles in these color pairings that are very interesting. And that mauve that she used in the binding. So Harold loves mauve. This is Double Poppy Date by Donna Ciliberto. And she said, this is a block study, my favorite design approach that plays with the idea of two blocks interacting. And I hope you can see how they're already interacting. She said, a modernized double poppy, which that's block number 3131 from Brackman's Encyclopedia of Quilt Blocks, and an unnamed diamond floor patch. They couldn't be more different, yet the attraction is real. They meet at the bottom left and quickly dance in graceful circles with a tiny spark erupting when the dance is complete. Corny, but that was my inspiration. This is a very interesting colorway with the lemon yellow and peach and plum and an almost coral pink with this straight line quilting through the middle, but then there's a really dynamic angled quilting all along the border, and you can see where the two blocks intersect each other. So the diamond floor patch or four block and these double poppy blocks come together and make those little sparks on the inside. So this is Grid Road by Sharon Schuld from Canada. And she said 1 mile by 2 mile blocks define the grid road system on the Canadian prairies. With this quilt, I explore the constraints, the variations, and the intersections of this system to create a prairie tapestry. I like how the intersections create a syncopated dance through the piece. The gentle movement of the parallel quilting references the furrows of worked land and the contours of vast prairies. So the curved quilting represents the contours of the prairie. It's almost like just agricultural blocks. And there are these tiny little cornerstones between all of the marked out land, the little gray, dark gray cornerstones. And a kind of an interesting color palette, sage green and like a seafoam green together with the blush and dusty rose and peach, kind of a burnt orange color. This is called I Am Not Whole, WHOLE, Without You by Gail Sevilla, or Sevilla. She said, my original improv was not whole until it was repurposed along with its opposites on the color wheel. Modern improvised quarter circles, drunkard's path variants are cut into the original piece. A ghost of the circles and grays flow into the border. We may feel whole, but having some contrast, some challenges can complete us more than we might expect. This bright neon green with teal, I think, were the original blocks, and then she put the fuchsia and red into it, might almost be vermilion, into it to give it that contrast. And the contrast is reflected in the big stitch quilting. And there's an embroidery here that says knowledge, wisdom, truth. It's just a nice little addition to the dark background. So this is Antlers by Birgitta Jadenfelt from Sweden. And it says a prolonged sharp drunkard's path block put in medallion design using the herringbone layout. The result is an image of antlers up on the wall as a hunter's trophy. The diamonds might represent the plaque holding the antlers. The antlers themselves can not only be of a stag, but also of a stag beetle, maybe? The quilting perfectly mirrors what's going on in the quilt, in my opinion. It's got that curved and also very sharp, pointy edges and some diamonds along with it. There's a really interesting ombre effect that she uses happening from the dark red all the way out to the very light white and peach. But it very much feels like antlers. I've seen this technique used vertically instead of in medallion or herringbone style, and it has a completely different feel. So it's interesting how just turning a block on its side or on its head can really change the look and feel. So this is Singularity by Nancy Missouri. And she said the Road to California quilt block is used to create a unique special effect. The smallest block is in the center of the quilt, and the block sizes radiate outward to the largest blocks being on the four corners. It's as if those California roads are leading to infinity. The gravity of the center block draws the eye inward like the center of a black hole, which is appropriately enough named Singularity. I really like when quilters take very small pieces and blow them up bigger on the edges or vice versa. It really does an interesting thing visually and aesthetically. So she's not only had very small 9-patch squares in the very center, but she also stretched them to make these rectangular 9-patch blocks. And then in the corners, they're just much bigger 9-patch squares. And then her quilting really feels like a road, like a winding road on the way to California or infinity, as the case may be. So this is Bibliography by Amy Friend. And hopefully you can tell right away, these are selvages that she has used. And she says in her artist statement, the use of selvages in quilts is like a modern spin on a traditional string quilt. And so that's a really interesting thought, and I think probably very true. She also said that because of using the selvages, it becomes a bibliography of all of the quilts she's made before because of all the fabric she's used. So it's like this quilt is its own documentation of the quilts she's made before. The blocks create a powerful impact where you may choose to focus on the star-shaped negative space created by the pink fabric or the soft edge square design created by the selvages. So this is the Capella Cluster by Karen Brown. If that name Karen Brown sounds familiar, this is the Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts, Karen Brown. And so she's from Canada, and this is her quilt, and it says, creating this quilt with kaleidoscope block has been a long-held aspiration. When I finally took the leap, I chose to break apart the traditional rotational symmetry, reimagining it on a grander scale. Rather than relying on the symmetry within each block, I designed 25 unique blocks, each one distinct, then rotated them across the quilt. This approach allows for a more dynamic interaction, creating a sense of movement that transcends the boundaries of each block. I've watched so many Karen Brown videos, Just Get It Done videos, I cannot even tell you. And one of the things that she talks about sometimes in her videos is that she can get wrapped up in moving the blocks around because she wants to get that arrangement just right. Like she doesn't want one area to have too much of this or not enough of that. And she has said in a video that she has to set a timer so that she doesn't just do it for hours or all day or whatever and not make any accomplishments. So what that impresses upon me is that she made these blocks, these 25 unique blocks, which you can see them, and how she put them together has made such a beautiful symmetrical design. And we know long held that teal and orange is such a beautiful artistic combination. And so she did together with that brown and blue and then navy in the center and edges and created such an interesting design, which she mirrored in many ways in the quilting, which it appears that she did her quilting in the same color as her blocks. I think this is so reflective of Karen's work and so beautiful and such a visually interesting design. And it uses those colors that she obviously loves and that are such a great combination together. So this is Pinpoint by Audrey Essery. And I feel like Audrey should be crowned the queen of curves. She just does so much beautiful work in piecing. This one, though, I would not have picked this to be hers, although now I see it. I feel like I have looked at so many of her gorgeous quilts and kind of longed for that level of skill and talent. But she says in the Pinpoint Quilt, it's a part of a series where she's working to minimize the number of seams while constructing each piece, reducing the visual noise from unnecessary seams. The teardrop shape in each block is cut from one continuous piece of fabric. And then she says, while the blocks are arranged in rows and columns, there's a strong diagonal created by the orientation of the block. And this design is completed by neon diagonal grid quilting. So there's pink, hot pink neon thread going from top left to bottom right for half of the quilt, and then from top right to bottom left, so it creates that quadrant. And then the opposing quilting thread is neon yellow. So in the top triangle, it's all neon yellow, and in the right and left, it's neon pink and yellow, and in the bottom, it's just neon pink. And then these colors mirrored in both the circles and the corners where they connect. So really interesting. I love that teardrop shape. This is called Fanciful by Mackenzie Leake. And she says that many of us have a special place in our hearts for traditional quilts with right angles and grids. Yes, please. But then she said, deviating from that structure can be difficult. In this quilt, I started with a grid and then broke free around the edges, adding fans and scallops. It became a modern sampler. I used bright colors to match the joy of leaving your comfort zone, even if that introduces the new challenge of binding these joyful extensions. So you can see her kind of traditional squares and bars, and then what she did out on the edges to make these curved edges. And I cannot imagine binding this quilt. I love what she did with the binding, but I cannot imagine binding this quilt. It is very fanciful, isn't it? So this is Tara is on my mind / imposter syndrome. And so you have to hear the artist statement to really be able to translate this. She said, I took Tara Vaughan, and Tara Vaughan is the keynote speaker and featured artist, by the way, for QuiltCon 2025, online wheel class. I have made wheel blocks before, but I wanted to see her process. It was a great class. After I finished my quilt for the Ruby and Bee Challenge, I saw the leftover fabric and just decided to make something fun. Little did I know, I was almost exactly recreating the quilt blocks from the thumbnail of her wheel class picture. I didn't set out to do that. There's some really interesting quilting in this quilt. A lot of echo quilting. There's some really interesting designs within each of the wheels. I'm glad to have the backstory. It helps me really appreciate the interesting artistry that's happening here. So this is Ovum by Julie Rubin. I followed Julie on Instagram and saw some of her work last year and was really just moved by what she does. It's such an interesting take on quilting, and her hand stitching is very extensive. So she says in her artist statement, I love how evocative oval shapes are. They suggest eggs and eyes and flower petals and much more. In this quilt, I superimposed 4 large hollow ovals on the top by changing the color of the thread from different shades of orange in the background to different shades of purple in the ovals. Part of a series of 4 color quilts that use intensive hand stitching. This is the first with the lightest color at the center. So I'm hoping you see, I'm not going to touch her quilt, but the ovals are here. So this is in purple hand stitching, and they're stitched very organically. So there's big oval here. There's 4 big ovals in purple hand stitching, and then varying degrees of orange in the centers of those ovals and also in the center of the quilt. It's a really interesting colorway. the teal and maroon and forest green, and then what the color of the thread does to the color of the actual fabric. So where the purple crosses into the blue, it looks more blue. Or crosses into the green, it looks like a blue or green, whereas where the orange crosses the green, it looks much more of a yellow green. And that's just the nature of that dense, intense hand quilting. So this is Out to Lunch by Steph Skardal, and it is so densely quilted that it almost looks like an indoor-outdoor carpet. It is tiny, tiny, tiny quilting. It says this quilt was inspired by the traditional quilting motif of flying geese. Each large triangle began with 3 geese in the same color, and a symmetrical layout was created, added around those 3 pieces. This quilt was assembled by merging pre-quilted pieces with a zigzag stitch. On the front, bias strips were added to cover all seams, and on the back, the seams were displayed to reveal the construction. Quilt top colors were hand-dyed. Steph Skardal always does such original and creative designs and construction. So the little teeny tiny bias strips that you can see are actually covering the zigzag stitch that formed the construction of the pieces. So these large pieces were attached together with a zigzag stitch and then covered with bias strips. So this is Log Cabin Reimagined by Lisa Barnes, and she's from here in Arizona. A traditional log cabin is reconfigured in piece to resemble birds gathered in groups sitting on a wire. The log cabins are rotary cut without rulers to elicit an intentional handmade appearance. The imperfections give the impression of hand-cut and hand-sewn traditional log cabin blocks in reimagined shapes. The thin black quilt lines resemble pencil line drawings of log cabins as geometric birds. So here we have another kind of reference to line drawings with very small piecing. I love the idea of kind of breaking open those log cabins and how the quilting really reinforces that they are log cabins. There's a lot of straight line quilting in between, but it kind of shows you where the construction of the log cabins are. But they really do like birds grouped together on a wire. And that's reinforced with this black quilting that outlines and kind of highlights what that wire and the birds might be. So this is Fiesta of Lines by Michele Vaughan. Inspired by bold hues of Mexican and American Indian art around Tucson, Echoes of India, Kawandi 4 brings an improvisational twist to the classic log cabin design. After taking Irene Roderick's Dancing with the Wall workshop, I've embraced improv, drawn to the freeform approach, letting color and pattern unfold naturally without having an end product in mind. Each piece and stitch reflects my journey, where design evolves intuitively with every choice guiding the next. So you can see kind of the loose association of log cabin. So there's a twist to it. You can see that improvisational twist. The color pairings are very much influenced by Mexican and Native American art. I can really see that. The colors of each thread match the color of the fabric that it's on, and it really enforces those bold hues. So this is Circuitry by Janice Reimer from Canada. Although quilts are technically three-dimensional, I enjoy exploring ways to enhance their dimensionality using design elements to create the illusion of depth. Further, improv quilting has always made me deeply uncomfortable, but this quilt design offered a way to experiment with the technique within the structured boundaries of a log cabin block. There is all this improv, but it's, like she said, within the confines of the elements of the log cabin. And because she extended those pieces out behind and under the brightly colored pieces, it has this 3D effect. And she even further reinforced that. And I'm going to point without touching. There is a tiny little strip of gray that creates this shadow. So it is as if this part that's coming across is actually really under these colored pieces, and it's creating a shadow. And she's done that all around the whole quilt. So particularly when you step back, besides the design is really interesting and lovely, and there's such beautiful piecing, there's also that three-dimensionality because of the shadow that she engineered in with those little gray shadow pieces. So this is nebulae, multiple nebula. So that would be nebulae by Carolina Oneto. I feel like I'm just destroying her name every time. I'm so sorry, Carolina, if I'm saying this wrong. From Brazil. And she said it's in a quilt inspired by the beauty of outer space, capturing the essence of nebulae within vibrant oranges, pinks, purples, and browns, incorporating a traditional clamshell block. In an improvisational style, it blends shapes and colors to evoke depth and movement. And I really do feel like you can see that. It's almost like you expect those to start swirling or maybe to part like clouds, like to separate and come in and out. There's some really interesting fabric here. In addition to the color, there's a metallic right in the center, and so it has that spacey sort of feel. She says, the quilt invites contemplation of celestial mysteries, while each stitch and hue reflect profound questions about the cosmos, creating a dynamic, thought-provoking experience. If I keep standing still, I'm just going to see a different part of the quilt. It's going to open up and show even more of itself. We're still in modern traditionalism, although this could be in piecing. It's Blooming Star by Daphné Parthoens. And it says the Blooming Star is made out of, I feel like I want to tell everyone to sit down, 6,144 half-inch diamonds arranged in a flower-like shape. Its bold and contrasting colors form a harmonious gradient and gives the quilt the impression of being three-dimensional. All its little hand-quilted pieces, guys, hand-quilted pieces, are meant to represent seeds planted in the ground to later bloom into luxurious flowers. This quilt is an ode to nature and its everlasting beauty. Her hand quilting through the actual design in the center of the quilt is not just one long line of hand quilting. Each diamond has a colored thread that matches it. And so what that means is in some of these blocks, there's just a tiny little row of stitches before she switched threads and went to a different row. Very small, light green, 3 diamonds that she hand quilted and then moved on to darker green and onto a darker green. And so some of those may be the same threads, but they definitely are not just one long row. So this is a commitment. So impressive. I love the yellow star in the center. I love the hand quilting that extends out to the edge. It does feel like it's star-like, but it's also flower-like. Just really, gosh, beautiful work from Daphné. So this is Which Way Is Up by Sandy Gregg. Based on the Bullseye block, this is an original design that originated in a personal challenge to learn the touch draw program and design a quilt with it. I really like the fabrics in this quilt. It's a beautiful design, and there's definitely some surprising interest. So the center orange piece is not the same as the orange piece on the edge. Likewise, the lighter teal is not the same as the darker teal along the edge of the big blue circle that surrounds it. And it does look like some of these fabrics are wovens, which really adds some texture. There's wavy quilting going in both horizontal and vertical, so it creates a lot of organic shapes within the quilting. So this is Perfectly Imperfect by Lisa Hoffmann-Maurer from Switzerland. And she said, in this quilt, I explored the drunkard's path block. I had fun playing with value and improv stripes from my scrap bin. The quilt is quilted with matchstick quilting in different colors of thread. It started out as a practice for curves and turned into some perfectly imperfect curves. This has a very maximalist feel to me. So the art movement maximalism, where there's just a lot, but there is some order in it. It's not just completely random. And so the black and white, the colored blocks, the colored quilting thread kind of unify it and give it some sense of order in all of the celebration of these fabrics and scraps. This is Music Sounds Better with You. Let's Dance. And I'm all of a sudden I'm hearing Let's Dance from David Bowie. Put on your red shoes and dance the blues. But it's by Jera MacKenzie from Canada. She said this quilt was inspired by the dance floor from the opening ceremonies of the 2024 Paris Olympic opening ceremonies, which is inspired by the Palace of Versailles marble courtyard. I just really fell in love with these Olympic Games. They were the joy and happiness we were all looking for. I wanted to add my own creative admiration to the spectacle. So there's neon green quilting and looks like teal blue quilting on a grid. Really impeccable piecing. Just very, very small. It's almost like teeny tiny sashing all within the blocks and around. So this is Ouch by Annie Hudnut. And she said, I've always been drawn to spikes in quilting because I love the energetic quality of a narrow triangle. And it definitely has an energetic quality and lots of narrow triangles. She says, basically still on New York Beauty, which is the quilt block, Ouch is the result of an experiment in improvisational foundation paper piecing. Armed with newsprint and a pencil, I was able to be both loose and accurate at the same time. Ouch is comprised of hand-dyed linen and commercial fabrics. So we have some neon yellow, neon green quilting. There's neon fabric in this quilt. Lots of jutting narrow triangles. It does feel like spikes to me. And with this black background, and there's even some gray spikes coming out. It has that, like it feels dangerous. It feels edgy. This is Open Question by Aline Bugarin from Brazil. And she said, what if we chose color for white work? Instead of burying threads, contemplate the paths, the encounters, and the stops to think and breathe. What if pride overcomes invisibility? What if we learned something from generations before, made us ready for something new? How would my whole cloth be if I could accept it fully, own my own process, and remember my roots, chase inspiration instead of perfection, witness true beauty emerge, and find creation at last? So you can tell this is just a completely white whole cloth quilt with quilting as the star exclusively. And so there's neon. I keep not being able to decide between neon green and neon yellow. That's probably the same thing. Teal, there's magenta, and there are varying weights of thread that she's used. So there's the big stitch hand quilting, there's machine quilting, creating circles and flying geese, squiggles and corner blocks. It's all there. So there's ribbon quilting sandwiched in between bubble quilting. This to me is what people who love the quilting are trying to communicate to those of us that love the piecing, that the quilting can really be the star and enhance what's already there. So this is My Heart by Stephanie Rule. And she said, this quilt is a riotous color celebration. I agree. I love it. Of a traditional log cabin design in which the fabric, air quoted fabric, is created improvisationally from quilting cotton and silk scraps. The binding, like the top, is also pieced in colors to complement the overall composition. The heavily quilted top uses the same philosophy as the quilt construction, using the thread I had on hand in many, many different colors, material, and thicknesses to create texture and shine. She created color blocks, improvisation color blocks, and then those are the elements of the log cabin. So center yellow square with orange bottom and side, and then purple, and then purple again, and then into pink, and so on and so forth, all around the loop like a log cabin. And when you see the quilting, it too is a riotous celebration of color. Even though there's a lot going on, the anchor is the log cabin design, and then that vertical quilting kind of like simultaneously brings it out and tones it down. This is Electric Gumballs by AnnMarie Cowley. We've seen a couple of her other quilts. She said, by arranging quarter circles in opposite directions and adding lines, an interesting design popped out. Took a lot of trials to get the colors the way I liked. The quilting is my seersucker in a grid. So you can see these quarter circles, but they're not lined up side by side or even across from each other on the diagonal. They're offset just by a little bit. And those corner pieces, those corner lines, separate them and also anchor the block. So it has a lot of symmetry, but it does feel very electric, which was her word for it, and I think it does. The combination of the colors plus those sharp pointed edges that emerge from the quarter circles give it that electric, vibrant feel.